Digging Deeper family, it is Tim, and I am here with Austin and Andy, A&A, the AA battery.
That's right, baby.
You guys are going to go on tour, you're going to have speaking gigs, and you're going to be the AA battery.
I'm a big fan of that, man.
That's right.
Yeah,
Andy, let's do that.
Yeah.
We get called the A-team. Bring your A game. We can go with this all day long.
All day.
There's a lot.
All day long.
We're not going to, although we could.
Grade A material.
Great. A.
What did I do? This is my fault. Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't even plan that, guys.
We didn't.
We didn't even plan that.
In my mind, I was like, what am I going to talk about? And I said, hey, batteries. Yeah, so you guys are familiar with Austin. Austin, how's it going?
It's going great, man. Happy to be here.
It's
been a while.
Has it?
Yeah, I feel like it has been. It's been probably like a month and a half, I think.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
I bailed on you last week.
You did. I'm not too hurt about it, but
Yeah.
we're good.
I feel horrible.
To my right, you are getting familiar with him. It is the Andy Fry. Andy, how are you?
I'm good.
Good to hear. Well, we're just going to hop right to it. You guys both taught this weekend. Austin out at Rogue River. Great message. Andy, haven't listened yet, but I've heard good things. No boo birds or anything. Taught at Redwood.
Not yet. Those come later in the week, man.
Yeah.
The emails come later.
So what I want to know from your guys' studying of this passage, what was your favorite thing? What excited you the most as you were preparing for this message?
Want me to kick it off?
Go for it.
Well, listen, I think when you teach John 3:16, or when John 3:16 is involved in any way, there's a certain level of like, oh, dang, because it's probably like the most known verse ever.
Yes.
And so there's a certain, I think, expectation put on yourself when you're teaching through this late night conversation that Jesus had with Nicodemus, because it is such a massive verse that he says, particularly in John 3:16. And so I think my favorite part in it was finding a way to package and reframe John 3:16 in an engaging way that hopefully teaches people really what it means outside of like this sort of robotic, like, for God so loved the world that gave his only begotten Son, whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life way, which some of us do, right? We all know John 3:16, but try to make it pop, try to put some poppets in it, make it jump a little bit.
Which one would argue that John 3:16 needs no pop, but what you're saying is maybe take the monotony out of.
Oh yeah,
because I think it's us that kind of monotonize, or this is just another verse.
You know how we all know WWJD, right? What would Jesus do?
Yeah.
And it's like you see it on bracelets, at least in my generation, throw it on bracelets, all that kind of stuff. And so you say it over and over again. It's like this trope that you constantly say, but when you actually like take a step back and go, man, what would Jesus do? I think it has a little bit different. When you meditate on it a little bit, you take some time. And so for John 3:16, I think it was the same thing there. Like, hey, let's set the context. Let's figure out really what was being said here. It was at night with one person that Jesus was saying this to, We talked about it at a life group. And I want to hear what the most exciting thing was for him. And I want to get back to a question I want to ask you is, why is it the most popular verse? Yeah.
Because it's that's fascinating, the context of it. Some people don't even know the context. Yeah. But before we get there, I'm going to let you stew on that for a bit.
Sure.
What was the most exciting thing for you regarding this passage and getting ready for it?
Well, in a way, I'm with Austin on this. I mean, I'm a little older than you two. So I remember when Jimmy Carter was born again, and I was in middle school, and everybody was really excited. So you have two of the biggest cliches in evangelical Christianity, born again and John 3:16. It's all there in that passage. And it's kind of like when I worked in a clothing store in the 80s and they played the same 30 songs over and over again. And, so there's certain Bon Jovi songs I just never want to hear.
Living on a Prayer? What?
Yes, that's one. That's one, every hour
Trigger
on
words
the hour.
for them.
But then, you come back to it, 20 years later and go, wow, that really is a great song. And so, like Austin said, you're like, okay, this is such a cliche. We're almost dead to it, which we shouldn't be. And in some ways, it's what I've enjoyed about researching and getting into preparing for a sermon is, even though I've been in church forever, getting a fresh look and then passing that on. And so, as I'm kind of with Austin on this, that was like, ooh, here we go. Yeah. Only 100,000 sermons to compare mine to. No pressure. And then diving and going, wow, there's so much more here that I didn't see until preaching will force you to dive deeper and ever. And that was really cool. And then to be able, hopefully, to pass that on to folks and say, wow, I know you've heard this, but have you really heard this? Have you seen all the context around it, the verses around it? Just it is, as Austin said, it's just packed full of goodness. And so to open that up, to find it for yourself and then pass it on, that's super fun, super cool.
I wonder how many people, like if we were to do a survey of folks who were at the different 4 churches this weekend, how many people would be able to say, hey, John 3:16, Jesus said that in a conversation to who? And I wonder how many people would be able to answer that question.
To who, when? I think that.
See, you got a teacher sitting here, so we want to give tests now. I mean,
maybe, man.
Hey, I'm good with that. I can make. I'm a professional.
I love like in the. This sounds bad. Speaking to a teacher, in the 2 terms of Bible school that I had, sorry guys. One of the classes I had was inductive Bible study. Right, it was Bible 350, and it was understanding the context and trying to find a way to complete the bridge. How do we go from their context to what it means now? And I think John 3:16, new life is breathed into it when you can really see the full picture and the context of it.
Yeah, it sits in a story. They don't stand in isolation, and that
it's a narrative, right?
Yeah, and that's. I think the last 2 sermons on John, I've tried to, and as a history teacher, you're always telling stories, so I love that, and so I enjoy putting it into a story. And you can look out and see people going, oh yeah, this is a story.
Totally.
Because as Christians, we tend to, we've got the verse on the wall, and that's cool, but we can forget the context. And then when we put a story, it does breathe new life. And hopefully, folks heard that and they enjoyed it, and they walked away with a deeper, richer.
For sure.
Sense of everything around that, and that adds new life into that familiar verse.
Yeah.
So.
And if you didn't like either of ours, the good news is there's, like he said, 700 zillion sermons on John 3:16.
Literally 700 zillion. It's a number. Google it.
Yep.
So on that, Austin, and we talked about this in Life Group last night, just a little bit. Why? When it comes to the most popular verse, why John 3:16?
Well, I think John 3:16, I heard it described as the reason it is so popular is because it's a succinct, very particularly well-packaged verse which describes the gospel, right? For God so loved the world. What does that mean? He so loved the world. If you parse that out and you really look at what it means, it's this deep sense of love. He so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. How many sons did he had? One son. Can you imagine that? Abraham, Isaac, you make the cool connections there. And so in that one passage, I think Jesus very succinctly describes something that every single one of us knows wholeheartedly for those of us who are Christians. It is this deep sense of love and sacrifice from the Father through the Son to us, received undeservedly, completely understanding that it was grace that we've received who he is to us. And so, and not only that, John Maxwell, he had a really interesting in one of his commentaries that I have on it. He says that most leaders find a way to communicate incredibly advanced and nuanced topics in a very simple and succinct way, and that's what Jesus did here. You could say that Jesus packaged his slogan and mission statement in one verse and made it portable, memorable, and very what's it called? But there's 3 of them. I can't remember all of them. But made it very memorable for people to be able to kind of go, oh, that's the gospel. Bam. And so Jesus did that well, and here we are. Thousands of years later, still saying it.
So it's the Reader's Digest gospel. I think that's what we said. It's just very, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Our life group said maybe it was Tim Tebow that made it so popular because it's the meaning that it's one of those verses that if you look out into a sports crowd and you see any Bible verse out there, you're going to see people.
Dude, I was reading I don't remember, I'm going to butcher it, but after Tebow wore John 3:16 on his face, do you know, there was
Google searches just went through the roof on that verse.
Millions and millions and millions of searches for John 3:16.
Brilliant. I mean, yeah.
Way to go, Tebow.
So real quick to you guys before we move on to the next question, second most popular verse? Thoughts?
Genesis 1:1 maybe? In the
Philippians,
God
the whole
created?
Bible?
Yeah. Philippians 4:13.
Maybe.
That was another Tim Tebow eyeshadow.
Yeah.
Right? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Yeah,
For I know the plans for you, Jeremiah 29:11 maybe?
Yeah. That'd be, and that's like, if you're asking now in America in this moment, it might be different than a different time, but
Yeah.
so, and maybe it's all Tim Tebow, I don't know. But
I doubt it's all Tim Tebow.
yeah, but yeah, that's a tough one.
Maybe Genesis 1?
Yeah,
maybe. In the beginning, God created?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Everyone's at least started to read through the Bible, and they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Romans 8:28.
They've gone that far.
I don't know about, like, just in general, because Christian or non-Christians, like, they know John 3:16.
Yeah.
Probably Philippians 4:13. I was saying in the life group, I feel bad for John 3:17, like, equally as powerful of a verse, but it's this little stepchild or whatever. Like people don't remember that because of what 3:16 brings. But yeah, popular verse, very powerful. It's powerful. If you're ever reading John 3:16 and you're like, this isn't speaking to me, then that's a you problem. It's not a.
Also, cross-reference with 1 John 3:16. That'll be fun too.
Yeah.
Just go ahead and do that for fun.
Dude,
You can
pause
take this
us
to the
right
bank.
now.
There you go. Go look it up.
There's a home. So we've had a test and homework.
Wow, guys.
And I'm the teacher, and he's the one doing all this. So this is awesome.
I love it.
I love it.
All right. Well, Austin, I just want to stick with you. So to answer your question, if people would be able to figure out who he was talking to, we know the answer. It's Nicodemus. I passed the test, something I don't do very often. But I want some context. One thing I love about digging deeper, and as you guys have just talked about, context. So who was Nicodemus? A couple things I'm firing at you. What was his role as a Jewish leader? Does he come up again in Scripture? And then what would he be correlated to in modern day?
Yeah, so in the book of John, we see him 3 times, right? We see him here in his midnight conversation with Jesus. We see him in John 7 when he's speaking to the Sanhedrin, a group of 70 people along with the high priest. And then I believe it's John 19 when, of course, he's helping Joseph of Arimathea sort of pack the body of Jesus. He brings aloe and he brings myrrh and he treats the recently deceased body of Jesus. And so we see him 3 times. Nicodemus is an interesting character. He was a Pharisee, as we know, and as the text states, but it says that he was a ruler of the Jews. And so one commentary I was reading was saying that could link him to being a member of the Sanhedrin. Obviously, that's verified later on in the book of John when he's sitting amongst the members of the Sanhedrin, and he's sort of very sheepishly tries to defend Jesus, sort of brushed aside. Just Nicodemus, mind your own business, dude. Go kick rocks.
Stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane, Nicodemus. Off with Jesus' head, like they're angry. And so, ruler of the Jews, powerful, influential man. He would have been educated. Another time, Jesus says, I believe it's in verse 14, that he's a teacher of Israel. And so that could indicate that he was considered a very good teacher, perhaps amongst other members of the Sanhedrin. Maybe he was a guy that people go, oh, Nicodemus is teaching in the temple. Nicodemus is out preaching. I got to go hear him. That guy's much better than the other guys. And so perhaps Nicodemus was a big dude, a big cheese back in that culture. People would have known who he was, respectable. Maybe this is one reason why he decided to meet with Jesus in the dark. Because if he was walking through the streets and he was wearing his Pharisaical garb, people would go, that's Nicodemus. And who's he meeting with? He's meeting with Jesus? That's not cool. Yeah. He shouldn't be doing that.
This is a big showdown.
Yeah, this is
pay-per-view only.
This is a big showdown. We see, a massive showdown going on. But Nicodemus, he was a esteemed member of society, but he was curious and he was humble enough to reach out to Jesus and have a midnight conversation with him. I think to a certain level, you can make a case that he was scared. There may be a lot of reasons as to why that he wanted to meet Jesus at night. Maybe the next time he saw Jesus was when he was taking care of his deceased body. We don't know that. Perhaps he was saved that very night that he met with Jesus. There's a lot of questions about him, but nonetheless, he's an interesting character. And I appreciate that the Gospel of John is the only gospel that brings up this narrative of Nicodemus, which is pretty cool. So there's a lot for you there.
Yeah, definitely. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. And Austin's nailed it in terms of who Nicodemus is. There's a lot of anointed speculation about various things, and one of the other things about going in the night, is 2 other possibilities. One is Jesus is popular; he's surrounded by crowds, and Nicodemus might not so much scared, although that's usually the leading possibility, but wanting a more private conversation. And then rabbis would often talk late into the night. That was actually considered a holy thing to do in the Jewish tradition. There was something, estimable about that. But you see Jesus flip the tables, I think, on Nicodemus. I think Nicodemus does come as like, I'm the authority, you're the young upstart.
I'm coming to evaluate you.
Yeah, I'm the old guy, you're the youngster. Not Andy and Austin, but Nicodemus and Jesus.
Nicodemus, Jesus.
Because Jesus is 30-something. Nick is he's a teacher of Israel, so he's probably up there in years. And Jesus, in the midst of this whole thing, not only rebukes Nicodemus, but then he says, you know who's been to heaven? The Son of Man, right? It's kind of like, have you been to heaven, Nick? Because I have. I'm the Son of Man. And who are you again? Yeah. Now, Jesus isn't doing that out of arrogance, but he is saying, you came as an authority to investigate me. You need to understand that I'm the authority. Because he's saying some crazy stuff that you shouldn't say unless you have the authority to say so, like being born again.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And so in that sense, for whatever Nicodemus's reasons, he was humble enough or curious enough to come seek the truth. But Jesus is going to push back on maybe his authority and say, you've come here, maybe thinking you're here to check me out. You need to understand that you're not the teacher anymore.
Yeah.
And I have a right to do that, right? And so, and again, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that I'm saying some things that are blowing your mind, Nicodemus. You need to listen. This is important. And possibly because Nicodemus really was hungry for the truth. And I think his later appearance at the foot of the cross indicates that there was a sincerity that Jesus does ultimately reward. Now, it may have been, Jesus says, I have to be lifted up. Maybe Nicodemus at the foot of the cross remember that conversation saying, oh, that's why he talked about Moses' serpent. And that may be the moment, like you said, where he goes, okay, I'm in. Right? So again, may have taken him time.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
A few things about him else that I really appreciate. Two things. It's interesting that John, the apostle, references Nicodemus in John 19 as the one who visited Jesus at night.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting.
Yeah, he does bring that back.
That he tied that midnight conversation to him in John 19. It's like an identifier of this guy who met with Jesus at night. I haven't spent a ton of time diving into that, but I think that's an interesting one. And then secondly, at the beginning of the conversation, Nicodemus had a certain level of respect for Jesus, because how does he start the conversation? Rabbi, which is super special, because up until this point, Jesus didn't have formal training the way that one would assume to be called rabbi. Like, he didn't have the PhD, he didn't have the master's. For all we know, he was a carpenter, right? Son of Joseph from Galilee, Bethlehem. What? Like, this guy didn't deserve that title, but nonetheless, there was Nicodemus, and he called him rabbi.
Yeah.
And so it shows something about his humility and curiosity there. But I do think he had his guard up a little bit, and I think when he met Jesus, I don't know, maybe this is conjecture, maybe people can comment or whatever, but I like to think that he was saved at that conversation. I really do. I don't know, but I like to think that at that moment he believed in his heart that Jesus was the Messiah, and then I think he had some growing pains. I think he had to really work it out and deal with it.
But so the disciples. So yeah, he's in the same boat as the disciples, So
Yeah.
because it's a big flip to go from your worldview, especially somebody like Nicodemus, who's done a lot of real thinking about it. He's sincere in his pursuit of God.
Yeah.
Or he wouldn't have been a Pharisee.
Yeah.
And so even if he begins to believe, it's like, okay, so now what does that mean? Well, it's all new, right? Jesus is new, and so, there's some growing pains. Maybe he was a bit timid, and who wouldn't be sitting in the Sanhedrin. But ultimately, he's got the guts to show up at the foot of the cross and publicly take care of the body.
Completely. That's one thing that I didn't talk about, and I'm about halfway through yours, and I don't know if you've discussed it or not yet. Yeah. But
I did not in mind.
Nicodemus had a lot more to lose than the other apostles that were called from their boats.
Yeah.
Because Nicodemus, like we said, was a known member in society. For Nicodemus to fall on his knees and truly be born again, not in the Jimmy Carter sense, but or Jimmy Carter, right? Was that the one? Yeah. But to really follow this Rabbi Jesus, this young 30-year-old guy who was speaking powerfully and doing these incredible things, he had his reputation on the line. He had a lot of things on the line to follow this guy Jesus. And so I think he's a great example of what people in society, leaders, governors, rulers, powerful businessmen, what perhaps their journey to salvation could look like. They have a lot to lose. Yeah. And following Jesus comes at a cost. I mean, we see that with the rich young ruler, and perhaps that was part of Nicodemus's narrative as well. So,
Jesus said it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom than a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And I think Jesus is recognizing that when you have power and wealth, you kind of have life under control. At least you think you do. Whereas if you're at the bottom of your life, you're like, well, my life is out of control. What do I have to lose? Right?
Totally.
So in some ways, for somebody who thinks they've got it all wrapped up, and Nicodemus is in that boat.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's a tougher journey. So you have to admire that at the end of the day, whenever it happened, Nicodemus in a public way is with Jesus.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's big, yeah.
Yeah, he's a cool character, man.
Yeah.
He's one that I hope I get to meet one day and sit down with him and just be like, man, I can you imagine? Just take yourself there. Can you imagine being the first person to hear, "For God so loved the world"? Yeah. Can you imagine that?
That's pretty cool.
Like that verse has been heard by billions of people, and to be the first person to hear that
He's got
from
copyrighted-
Jesus.
The copyrights on that.
Woo,
That'd be
man.
fun to sit down with him and be like, all right, Nicodemus, what was that like? I mean,
It had to have blown his mind, dude.
well, yeah.
It had to have.
So speaking of that conversation, I want to kind of ask you guys, and I don't have it all memorized, but Jesus is talking about being born again. Obviously, Nicodemus is like, "What are you talking about?" And Jesus responds back, kind of like you should know what I'm talking about. So to you guys, just a quick question: should Nicodemus, Nicodemus,
Just call him Nick.
yeah, should he have understood this concept of being born again, or was this a completely new introduced concept that Jesus was just turning the tables on?
Yeah, it's not completely new. In Jewish culture, there is born again was the phrase applied to a Gentile convert when they were brought into Judaism, a righteous Gentile, went through circumcision, that was possible. And they were called born again. So in essence, what Nicodemus may have heard when Jesus said that is, "You're not a Jew yet," or "You need to be converted." And of course, he's like the leader. He's like, "What?" It's like
What are
telling
you
the
talking
Pope,
about?
"You're not Catholic enough." It's like it's kind of like, "Well, hang on. What do you mean I need to be born again? I was born a son of Abraham." And so born again also is in Greek. It's the word for fathering. So there's two words. There's giving birth as a mom, and there's a word for fathering. And Jesus used the fathering word. So a Jew says we are sons of Abraham. He is our father. Therefore, we get into heaven. So Nicodemus hears you need to be refathered.
Yeah.
It's not good enough to be a son of Abraham. And that's like Jesus' opening statement. I mean, right away, let me begin by blowing up everything you
completely.
think is true.
Completely.
And so, and you sense that Nicodemus's responses are, "Wait, you mean I got to go back in the womb because you can't possibly mean what you just said."
Yeah.
And then later on, he goes, "How can this be?" Right? I mean, he is just absolutely flummoxed. His processing can't keep up with this. So although he was familiar with the term, the way Jesus puts the term to him challenges everything Nicodemus thinks is so about how to enter the kingdom of Yahweh. Which is how he's thinking. I am part of God's kingdom, and we're just waiting for Messiah to come and get rid of the Romans. And Jesus is like, no, we're going to go back to square one. You got to be born again.
Yeah.
And so it's not that it was new to him, but what Jesus is saying to him is in direct opposition to what Nicodemus thinks is the way to God. And that's why Nicodemus is so flabbergasted.
Yeah. He's blown away. And one thing that I discussed in my lesson is how, like you said, this would have been groundbreaking, mad news to him. For someone who grew up as a Jewish boy, being trained in a certain worldview, having a general understanding of Hebrew scriptures, and then to see Jesus essentially standing there and saying, "Yeah, all of that, everything you've learned, I'm fulfilling perfectly. But here's the other thing. I'm not just going to save the Jewish people, for God so loved the world."
Yeah.
So it's like, everything that you've studied, everything you've learned, I'm the missing puzzle piece. And by the way, this missing puzzle piece is not just for the Jewish community, it's for the entire world. And I love the mystery that John, the author, gives us here, because we don't see Nicodemus respond. We don't see his response in this narrative. He doesn't respond and say, "Oh, wow, that's incredible. Everything makes sense now." I imagine that was a sleepless night for him when he finally made it back to his house.
And in
Would
a
have blown
sense,
his mind.
the narrative, Nicodemus fades out. It's almost as if John is the writer who tells the story, if this were a camera, he would turn and break the third wall and face the audience and start saying, "For God so loved the world." It almost Nicodemus disappears, and John's narrative of this story is now coming directly at us.
Completely. Yeah.
And we are, coming to us, the world, right? Because John is sending this out in Greek to the Greco-Roman Jewish. It's out to everybody.
Everyone.
Right? Back to chapter 1 with Logos, right? So he's saying, "Listen, world. Listen, my fellow Jews. Listen, Greeks. For God so loved the world." And Nicodemus, right? His concept of Messiah is we're going to get rid of the Romans and we're going to have a righteous kingdom. And Jesus like, it's a little bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible. I've heard, I can't remember where I heard it described like this way, but how the gospel message blows up this idea of an inclusive exclusivity. Or in other words, like the gospel message is inclusive, but it's also exclusive and incredibly personal for you.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing about the context I love. And this was one of my main points in the lesson, is that he's speaking directly to Nicodemus.
Yeah.
He's speaking directly to one person, but at the same time, he's speaking about the inclusivity of his message, which is available to every single person, which is a mind-blowing concept, which is this massive, expansive gospel, but at the same time, incredibly personal. And he does that masterfully. Yeah. And I love that picture too, of almost, like you said, panning the camera out, because it's this, dramatically making a movie out of this scene. You could do it so well, because it had to have been an incredible moment. It had to have been an incredible moment. Yeah.
No, that's good. So going from Nicodemus to Jesus' response to him, verse 4, Nicodemus is just befuddled. What do you mean? How can an old man go back into his mother's womb? And Andy, I believe I'm sending this question to you. Unpack verse 5. Jesus replied, I assure you, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and spirit. For my studying, there's a few different kind of thoughts as to maybe what the water and spirit thing means. So I want to hear your 2 cents on that.
Yeah, well, and I certainly don't have a PhD in theology, so I'm looking at a lot of wise people, and when you find wise theologians disagreeing, that it's okay to
it gives
say,
you a little peace. Honestly, it does.
Oh, okay, there is mystery about this amongst people who you would respect. So there is a bit. There's 2 clues I think that help move you down. I mean, there's some roads that are not correct. Like, so some people say, oh, like when a woman breaks water, so it means you have to be physically born. But as several commentators point out, that's so obvious, and this conversation is so deep that it's too obvious. And also in that culture, they didn't talk about a woman breaking her water. Right. So in that language and culture, that wouldn't have actually used that word. Yeah. So that one's kind of off the table. Baptism, a lot of people lean that way, except everything else in the whole counsel of God is that, water doesn't save you. So not literally baptism. So that one doesn't quite work either. Some people talk about it's a metaphor for the word of God. That's a little bit better, but it's still shaky. I think the 2 clues, though, are, number one, the grammar there in Greek is more literally translated, unless you are born of water, even of the Spirit. So it's not clear that those are 2 entirely separated things, which when we say and, so not to be too wonky about it, but those are tied together more tightly than maybe we pick up initially. The second thing is that this is pointing to, and remember, Nick knows the scriptures inside and out. I mean, if he's a Pharisee, he's got chunks memorized that would blow our minds. And later Jesus says, you should know what this means again.
I love that.
And so that makes sense when you look at Ezekiel, who talks about gathering the kingdom. It's a messianic prophecy, so Jesus is there as Messiah, washing them with the water, which comes, so the king, they will repent, they'll be washed, and then empowered by the Spirit. So both water and Spirit appear in that passage in Ezekiel. And so what probably makes the most sense, and this could come through the Word of God, is him saying, you need to repent, you need to be washed by the Spirit and empowered by the Spirit, right? So if Jesus had said, you need to be cleaned up, Nicodemus could say, oh, well, I can wash myself. But what Jesus is going is you have to be born again. You cannot birth yourself. You have no role to play in that. And to bring to another metaphor from Ezekiel, he talks about the heart of stone becoming a heart of flesh, and which is a resurrection image. You cannot resurrect yourself. In other words, Nicodemus, you're dirty and you're dead. You need to be washed and resurrected. You need to be reborn, regenerated, not reformed. The rabbis taught in that, the Pharisees taught that if all Israel obeyed the law for a day, Messiah would come. And so their goal was to get all the Jews to be better behaved.
Yep. Ship shape.
Yep. Get all 613 rabbinical commands, the kosher stuff. Get it down, because if we can pull this off for one day, every one of us, Messiah will come. I don't know if that's what Nicodemus, because some Pharisees did and didn't. But, I mean, that was sort of the mode of the time. And Jesus is saying, no, that's not it. This is something that can only come through God. You cannot do this yourself. You think you've got God boxed in, and when you check off the boxes, he has to do what you want him to do. That's why then the very next verses, we start talking about the Spirit's like the wind. It goes where it goes, and you can't even understand it. That's what's going on here, Nicodemus. This is beyond your list of rules and your little boxes. And so I think the water and Spirit there are linked more tightly than maybe the conjunction "and" tells us. And I think he's pointing at Ezekiel, which is why just a verse later he says, "Come on, Nick, you should know this."
I wholeheartedly agree. It was interesting in studying this week about how much debate there is on that text.
Yeah.
Like there are so many different points of views, but yeah, Ezekiel 36, very well said, Andy. I think it's 100% Jesus is referencing that heart of stone, heart of flesh, Spirit, truth. And then I think that's, like you said, why Jesus is like, you should know this. Like you have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy memorized, dude. This is your wheelhouse. I'm speaking your language and you're missing it. Like you're missing this. You should know what I'm saying. How are you missing this? And it's very well said.
And Jesus says, I'm just talking of the easy stuff. When I start talking heavenly things, how are you going to keep up, right? I mean, there's that verse. And you're like, okay, Jesus. I mean, I'm a teacher. I've chewed out a few students, but Jesus kind of lets him have it.
He does. He does.
You're my AP Advanced A+ student here, and you're not keeping up. So you catch, to catch some of the flavor of the conversation. But I think that rebuke is actually points us back to the evidence that that's what the water means.
I totally agree. Yeah. One point that I made, Andy, and I'd be curious to see what you think about this, is that part of me really does appreciate Nicodemus's lack of understanding here.
Yeah.
Because I think it gives us permission to go, what?
Yeah, those are shoes that we can sit in.
Yeah,
all right, good.
What are you saying here in Romans chapter 13? Because this isn't making sense to me. Yeah. And being able to go like, okay, Nicodemus, like you said, very well educated, smart man, and he's standing before the Savior of the world, before Jesus Christ, and he's like, yeah, I don't see it. And it's like, that is like such great encouragement for somebody like me, who every single week when I sit down and do sermon prep, every single week when I read the text, 5-6 times, I'm gonna go, what the heck? What the heck? And I'm just like, Lord, help. And he does. He tends to help. It's just like, I love that. So don't get discouraged if you're studying God's word and you're going,
and Jesus does stick with Nick, right? I mean,
he sticks with him.
He sticks with him.
Well, he sticks with him.
He kind of shakes him up a little, and because we have to be open, learning, and humble. But then he launches into that beautiful, okay, here's how it works. For God so loved the world, right? Yeah. That's when Nick gets that part, right? Nick gets to hear the whole package.
He even continues working with him though. In that he goes to verse 14 where he talks about the snake, the bronze snake being lifted up, and so he even goes, okay, you don't understand what I'm saying here. I'll give you another one.
Yeah, we'll talk Numbers. Should know.
Yeah, you should know Numbers 21. Remember when they all got bit? Remember, you have this memorized. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So he's so kind, but also very stern. So I love that. I love that.
Yeah, no, that's super good. It's interesting in the few weeks we've been in John, you see these interactions in the very beginning of the book. So I think of kind of a firm conversation with mother at the wedding, firm conversation with Nicodemus knocking him off a pedestal. But then at the end of Jesus' life and his ministry, we actually see really, really intimate moments with both of them. So like you said, Jesus sticks with them, right? We see he calls her woman again, but it is as he is on the cross taking care of her. We see a very intimate moment between Nicodemus and Jesus' body.
Yeah.
So it's cool. You see him humbled, but then you see very intimate connection with Jesus down the road. So
John's doing something. I haven't put my finger on it yet, and I'm trying to figure out what it is. And if you know what it is, let me know. But John is doing this thing in the first few chapters of the book of John that is showing us something about the character of Jesus and the way in which we respond to who he is. And here's what I mean by that. We see Jesus in so many different scenes. Even this week, we see Jesus in a midnight conversation with Nicodemus, having a great chat with him. And then right after this conversation, him and his disciples head out and they're baptizing, right? And then there's jealousy from John the Baptist's disciples. And so it's interesting how John is weaving all of these things that Jesus is doing and showing us the failure of humanity and then the way in which we kind of recalibrate and get focused back on Jesus. It's very interesting, and I can't really put my finger on the thread. Maybe that is the thread, but it's just fascinating how he he's keeping Jesus at the center of the narrative, and then using so many different stories to show how humans fall, but Jesus is there. Or even John the Baptist, I must decrease and he must increase, you know, which is this upcoming week. But I don't know. There's something there, and I can't figure it out yet.
All right. Well, listeners, if you think you know it's there, you know where to email.
There's
us.
this string. That's what I'm saying. There's this string that there's this narrative that he's trying to paint to show us, I think, something about human nature and our response to Jesus. I'm seeing it, but I can't.
Yeah, I mean, John is, so it's a very different way of writing. He's a creative writer, and you know, some of the thing, even playing with pneuma, which is wind and spirit. He's even playful with language. He's gifted, and so he's not merely telling a story. He is weaving something there.
Yeah.
One of the patterns, and you see it, Nicodemus, is the misunderstood question. And I read this in a commentary, so this is me just borrowing somebody else's brilliance, but that you see this pattern over and over again of a person comes to Jesus, they ask a question, Jesus' response shows that they really are asking the wrong question. He sort of reframes their questioning, and then it's a confrontation because it blows them away, and then they have to figure out what to do with Jesus. And that is the central question, right? He ultimately looks at the disciples and says, but who do you say that I am, right? And John ends with the confrontation with Thomas.
Yeah.
And Thomas, what do you think now?
Yeah, that's good.
Right? And so, but you have that, you know, the woman at the well. I mean, who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? And I don't know if I, you know, again, can answer the deep literary question behind your question, but I think it's clear that one of the biggest themes is John is there is this person, Jesus. You have to decide who he is.
Yeah.
That is the most significant question you can answer.
Yeah.
And you see that over and over and over again with these various characters. So
it's so interesting, and it's so interesting, and the way he does write, you can tell that this is the last gospel account written, and that it's written from a man who's well advanced in years. Like this is coming from a person who has a deep well of wisdom and love and understanding. Because when you really do dig into what he is saying, and not even what he's saying, but the way he's saying it, it kind of blows your mind a little bit, and you're like, "Wow, this is rich." I'm loving this series.
And we are just 3 chapters in.
Yeah,
it is.
I'm loving it, dude.
Yeah,
because there is so much. I feel like I don't know if you felt like this, Andy, but this week I almost felt like I did a disservice in that I felt like I left so much out. I felt like there were so many sub points and subplots that I'm like, man, I should talk about that.
Yeah, when my wife says, "How long is your sermon?" and I say 12 pages, and she knows that I'm good for 6. She's like,
how long was your sermon this week?
Well, you know, at some point the notes ran 30 pages, and then the script was going up 9, 10, and I just had to stop and say I got to start cutting. So I mean,
not the worst.
Yeah, it's fun, but then you're like, oh, okay, well, I need to go this way. This is more important than that. I guess I got to cut that. But I think that's part of teaching is, you know, I had Dennis Weber at Parkway wisely said to me once, Andy, tell them what they need to know, not everything that you know. So because you find so much, you want to give it all away.
Dude, talk about humbling for a teacher.
So you should. I know Tyler. He runs a tight ship out there, at Redwood. All right, he's like 30 minutes.
He gives me a little wiggle.
Okay, because out in Rogue River, we pulling guns at the holster, man. I think I went 47 this week. I think
the next service is waiting outside the door, and it's a quick turnaround.
I love it. Come on out. You can go as long as you like.
Yeah,
50 minutes, you get a prize.
but it's exciting to have all that richness. Right?
It is.
It's and sometimes I look at a passage and go, well, I don't know if I'm going to get much out of this, and then 12 pages later, okay, yep, there it was.
Yep, there's plenty.
So I'm like a little kid. I'm just having fun. So hopefully, again, that comes across, and that joy and that richness is we're giving that away to people.
People see it too. Like when you have fun. One thing I love about teaching the Bible is that when I think people can tell when you had a fun week of study. You know what I mean? Like if you had a fun week of study, I think people can tell, wow, there's something here. And it's almost like, you know, Pastor Mark used this idea that a lot of stuff is caught and not necessarily taught. Yeah. And the way in which
an old John Maxwell quote.
Is that John Maxwell?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, there you go. I think there's something to that in being a pastor and a preacher and really anything, just as far as leadership, John Maxwell. I mean, when you're excited and pumped about something that you've spent a long time studying, 20 hours, people will go, dang, there's something there. Yeah. And I love that he scratched the surface. I saw the tip of the iceberg, but man, you better believe there's a lot under the surface.
Yeah.
And,
so study more, read more. It's
that's right.
More.
We didn't give it all away. There's more to find.
I want people to buy commentaries. I think there's a lot of like laymen who don't have commentaries and other perspectives. They listen to sermons, which is awesome, but you go do the study we do. Like, go grab some commentaries, like dig in, man. It's good stuff.
It is. A lot of good stuff here. I do have one parting cue before we go, though. I know we're hitting that. I'm almost done listening to this meter on the timeline for you listeners. But one more parting cue for you guys. Been a lot of good stuff. Andy, I'm going to send it your way.
Okay.
Unpacking this term of being born again. Making a generalization here. I do feel like we see a lot of people who are born again. They come into the family of Christ and they are on fire. They are just ready to do everything, convert everyone, read everything. And then we see kind of a weaning off, a calm down. So what I want to know is why is this? And is this them kind of maturing, or is it actually them being worn down? Because I think I've seen people in both manners. They just go, and they learn, hey, I can back off. But then I see people just kind of look just haggard. So curious why maybe this generalization happens. And
well, I think there's several whys. Some are normal and some are maybe sad. And Jesus had the parable of the sower and pointed out that in all of those the gospel takes root, but you have very different long-term responses. But in a way, and again, here's the old guy talking, after 31 years of marriage, Jesus and our relationship with Christ is often compared to a marriage. And as you think about it, when you first get married, you're sort of giddy and romantic, and then you start dealing with the real world. And in both cases, after 30 years, marriage looks different. One case might be that your marriage has gone bad. And that can happen with people, that they fall out of love with Jesus, right? You have this initial giddy romantic phase, and that's sad. And hopefully, if you've been married long enough, you go through rough spells where you're irritated with your partner. That can happen in your relationship with Christ, but hopefully that's renewed. But the flip side of that is when you see old married couples that are in love. Now, they're not necessarily running around like newlyweds, but in some ways that love is deeper and steadier. And hopefully what we may perceive as, because sometimes people who are newly saved, they're on fire and they scorch everybody around them because they're also immature on how they handle that, right? And so I think there's two ways that goes, that our perception of people's relationship with Christ can be that they're more mellow than when they first started. But that mellowing can be a deepening of the love, and maybe the gentleness comes in after the initial enthusiasm, and you realize that the way you bring Christ to people is not necessarily battering them into the kingdom with your enthusiasm. Sadly, it can also go the other way. So I think like marriage, it can be a mellowing and a deepening, or it can be that people go through rough spells in their relationship, right? Because initially you're giddy, and then you got to deal with the real world, and you got to deal with the reality that you're still not perfect, and you got to deal with all the stuff in life, and you haven't got the maturity to deal with that in a WWJD way, right? Yeah. And so there are these growing pains, and sometimes that doesn't go well. So as Christians, we have to continually be on our guard that we're that we are losing our vision of Christ, right? Peter steps out of the boat, right? He's walking on water, and then he gets his eyes off Christ and he sinks, right? That's the Christian walk in a nutshell, right? And so he's got to get his eyes back on Jesus. But again, I think there can be, from our perception, there can be a good thing, like there's a deepening and a strengthening, but also maybe a bit of mellowing of the human enthusiasm, which is normal at the beginning, right? When you fall in love the first time, you're just top of the world and everybody's sick of being around you. Stop talking about it, right? And you can kind of overdo that. But there can also be the negative side of that. So I think that's where, as Christians, we need to become mature in our walk and deepen and get those spiritual muscles built up for the long run. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking in the beginning of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You use the analogy of marriage and being married 30 plus years. First of all, congratulations. That's incredible. That's
congratulate my wife, poor lady.
Well,
Terry, thanks for hanging with me.
That's right. So Maddie and I have been married over 3 years now. So July 14th. So not nearly as long. But one thing that I found fascinating is that when you read a bunch of marriage books, you look at statistics on marriage. Most statistically, divorces take place at the 3-year mark, the 7-year mark, and then like the 20-year mark, which it's interesting.
Yeah, 16,
is 16, 20, somewhere in there. It's interesting because Maddie and I we just passed 3 years. And so we're kind of, looking at each other going, hey, we made the first, camel hump. Yeehaw, let's go. But it's interesting. We did notice something in our marriage. We noticed that at 3 years, we feel completely comfortable in our own skin around each other. Like, in other words, Austin is fully comfortable with Maddie. Maddie is fully comfortable with Austin. No bars hold, nothing like that. We are completely known together and all of that. With that comfortability sometimes comes stagnation.
Yeah.
And so what we found in 3 years of marriage, and I sound like a little child here speaking to people who've been married much longer than me, what we found is that we have to a certain level, plan out and schedule, whether it be intimacy,
quality time,
walks, and we have to be super intentional about saying, hey, our schedule's doing this, and it means that I'm not here with you here, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to be super passionate about making sure we can spend time with you.
Yeah.
What's my point in sharing
intentional.
that?
Yeah.
What's my point in sharing that? Is that is a great picture of what our walk with Jesus should look like.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get spiritually stagnant. We kick it into cruise control. And I think the more you grow, the more you realize that you have to be disciplined.
Yeah.
I heard one pastor describe this idea of having a disciplined delight, right? Like, take joy in scheduling a date with your wife should be the same thing we take joy in scheduling time with Jesus. Like, that's a sign of maturity when we go, hey, just like I'm going to take my wife out for dinner, I'm going to spend my day communicating and talking with the Lord. And it may be out of my rhythm, but this is what disciplined delight looks like. It may be hard. It may be not necessarily conducive to my lifestyle right now, but I'm going to do it because I'm going to find delight in my Savior and in Jesus. And so I love that picture of a bridegroom. We're actually talking about that next week in John 3, right? Yeah, sometimes you got to work. Sometimes you got to work for it. And I'll tell you what really spooks me is I have a lot of fear, to be totally honest. And I know we're getting to the end of this podcast, and this is a whole different conversation. But I have a lot of fear. I don't know if I would say fear, but a lot of concern about people who have been doing this thing called church and this thing called Christianity for a long time and got saved when they were in high school, had this amazing moment, emotional, transforming experience with God, and then have lived the rest of their lives basing their spirituality on past moments and haven't actually sought him out since then. And are almost resting on the laurels of that one moment at that summer camp
Coasting
when they were
down the roller
16. And you can only coast when you're going downhill. And I don't think people realize that. Sometimes to climb to the mountaintop, you got to pedal. And it's hard work, but you got to do it. And so sometimes for me, when I meet with people, when I teach, I try to keep that idea in the back of my mind. There are some people that have kicked it into cruise control for the last 25 years. And what can be said today? What can go into this lesson that will jolt people out of it? Give them a jolt of C4 and go, hey, what does Jesus mean for you today? What does this mean today? How can we rekindle that fire and that passion, that you had when you were 17, 18, or in your 20s? And so, disciplined delight. Long story. You got two talkers today, Tim.
Hey,
I'm sorry, man.
No, and I'm a listener, so that was perfect.
I'm
It's
sorry.
Literally what I want. That's what people.
But
like.
you did have the AA game, so that's
right.
That's what you get when you put AA batteries into dig deeper.
you get energy.
It's a problem, man.
No, it was not a problem. This is literally a podcast about people discussing the word, and that's what you guys did.
Sometimes I feel like you need a beeper, and you can say, Austin, knock it off. Stop talking.
All right,
You have the authority to do that.
I'll get a beeper.
Okay, you can just tap the
powered by
cup or
AA batteries. No, real quick though, last 60 seconds. Resources. Do you guys have resources for? And I know it's kind of resources on the Book of John. This idea of being born again, or just our favorite topic in this passage, Jesus. Any resources you want to offer our listeners as they get ready to hit the stop button? Beep. beep. No, I'm practicing my beeping.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, I think I've shared this before. There is a wonderful little booklet by a pastor down in California. I'm completely spacing the name, and it's a little tiny booklet. It does not have beautiful art. It's called The Gospel Primer. It's a very good little booklet, and it's essentially poems written by him that do a great job of centering your heart on the gospel. When you look at like a subcompact message of the gospel, John 3:16, the Gospel Primer is a great thing for me personally to set my day off right. I read something, and the little preface is preach the gospel to yourself daily, and I love it because
nice.
I'll read it and go, man, I have been saved. Praise Jesus. And it's a cool thing, you know. So Gospel Primer, this is bad. I'm forgetting who wrote it. It's on my desk, and I read it
Google.
constantly.
People got Google Gospel Primer,
Gospel
California
Primer.
pastor.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's not long. It's 65 or so pages, but it's really good, really good.
All right.
Every time you do this, I forget to look at my resources.
That is totally fine. Your brain,
but
that's the resource.
I would reiterate maybe what Austin said, and if Terry were here, my wife, has a degree in spiritual formation. She's big on spiritual discipline, that intentional cultivation of delight, and so she's sorry, honey, I'll invite you next time, and you can just spout off her bookshelf. Would be a great set of resources, but looking for those things that you can daily plug in, as Austin was saying, to Scripture, whether it's 5 minutes to start your day or a deeper study, but doing that intentionally. In the same way that sometimes Friday night, my wife and I have a date, I come home exhausted from work, but it's like, you know what, suck it up.
Yep.
It's not about you. And then once we're out on that date, I forget about how tired I'm having a great time. And sometimes spiritual discipline, it's time to do this. But I just encourage you, once you're into it, after a couple of days, you go like, wow, this is good. This is filling me up. It's not draining me. So those kind of things that you can find that intentionally build your moments each day to connect with the Spirit, to connect with Christ in a real way will be the thing that keeps you from coasting.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very well said.
Awesome.
What about you, Tim? You have any resources?
Not off the top of my head. I just ask the questions. I don't answer them. But no, I'm trying to think of the stuff I've been reading, but I think it's the stuff that we've kind
The
of been
Bible's
talking
good.
about.
You could read
Yeah,
John.
Bible's good.
Read John.
I read that. No, I got nothing.
Cool. Put you on the spot, man.
I appreciate it. Cool. And on that, beep. Gentlemen, thank you very much. The AA battery brought to you by Dig Deeper. Listeners, catch you next time.